Welcome. It's Monday. It's the Harbert Center. It's basketball season. It's the Birmingham Tip-Off Club, and glad to have y'all here and glad to be here amongst y'all on this great day. We have a really good program today. I'm really excited about this. We've got 1/4 of the selection committee here, so if we can find a few more, we can get a quorum and get this thing decided right here in Birmingham. Our head table is Jim Conrad, and we're also going to have Charles McClelland, Greg Byrne, Martin Newton. These are respectively the commissioner of the SWAC, Alabama AD, and Samford AD. And then Bishop Mike Watson will be leading us in prayer. So let's see, Mike, come on up. We'll be getting to you here in a second. Few announcements. The Tip-Off Club Squadron Night is this Friday. You need to get tickets by Thursday. We'll have 5:30 meet on the court to see warm-ups for the team. Dinner is at 6. Tip-off is at 7, and there's a post-game opportunity for a picture on the court. The tickets are $30. Good bargain. The food is always good there, so we hope you join us at the Tip-Off Club night at the Squadron on Friday night. Next week, wonderful basketball time in this state and this city. The state high school basketball championships will begin next Monday, and we'll go through March 4th at the Civic Center. The Tip-Off Club is one of the key volunteer groups in this. We provide a host to each team. There are 56 teams participating. We need 10 more hosts. So if you've not signed up and you think you'd like to do it, please sign up. If you know people who are not members who would be interested in being a team host, please let us know. Our team host person is Dick Coffey, and I've got Dick's number if you need that, and he's here too. And then Jimmy Carlson, wave Jimmy. He is the team hospitality host. So they're our point people on getting this together and our response. Did want to say basketball season is really looking good for our local teams. Bama keeps rolling on. Really hoping that they are here in Birmingham in a few weeks. My beloved Blazers, after a midseason slump, are now 8 out of the last 9, which is pretty darn good. Auburn had some issues with Vandy, but they're in the middle of a season that's going to give them in the tournament. One thing that I looked at was that in the hottest team in the A-Sun right now is the University of North Alabama, which is new to Division I, and the hottest team in the Sun Belt is South Alabama. So let us all hope, and then Samford, let's not forget them, and the Southern Conference leading the Southern Conference. So if everything works right, you could get 6 teams from Alabama in the NCAA tournament. And I think you'd have to go to a lot bigger state to find anybody close to that. So I would like to now introduce for our invocation and Pledge of Allegiance, Bishop Mike Watson.
Thank you, Scotty. Let us pray. Most gracious Lord of us all, we thank you once again for the wonderful fellowship we experience as we enjoy this Greater Birmingham Tip-Off Club and the beautiful sport of basketball that we celebrate and support. On this third Monday in February, President's Day 2023, we express our gratitude for this beloved country of ours, our hard-won freedoms, and our many, many blessings, along with our constant desire for an ever more perfected union as we seek to be even more obedient to your divine will and holy way. Please never cease your work in our improvement. Be with those who have come to lead this meeting and with those who have come to present the program. We pray your blessings upon each one of them. We're grateful for the food that's been raised, prepared, and served today, and for all of those who participated in that process. Bless them in a very special way for we have been nourished and strengthened. We make this prayer in your most holy name. Amen. Would you please stand, face the flag, and join in our Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now, since you just sat down and got comfortable, it is time to introduce our MC, the one, the only, the man who we all would like to be and all women wish they had, Kevin Scarbinsky.
I want what he's having. Good afternoon, everyone. And just for the record, I want you to know I was in the lobby at 11:57. First, yes, but I was on time, kind of, sort of. All right. We're at a great time of year, in a great place to be, in a great state for the sport of basketball. Saturday, February 18th, 2023. Maybe to some people, it was just another Saturday in February. Not around here. UAB, as Scotty mentioned, they spot UTSA an 11-0 lead. They come back to win their 20th game of the season, which means Andy Kennedy has now won 20 or more games in 13 of his first 16 seasons as a head coach. You know how many other active coaches have done that? 5. John Calipari, Mark Few, Jim Boeheim, Jamie Dixon, and Andy's mentor, Bob Huggins. That's pretty exclusive company. That's the head coach of the UAB Blazers. Samford goes on the road, shoots the lights out at VMI. Hit what, 21 threes? Martin, 21 out of 36? Who makes 21 out of 36 in practice against the air? That's what the Bulldogs do on a regular basis. That was their 20th win of the season. For the second straight year in the regular season, which they've never done before. They've won 20 in back-to-back seasons before once in their Division I history, back in the 99 and 2000 seasons. And of course, those teams both went to the NCAA tournament. So if you are not busy at, Frank, 1 o'clock Saturday, I want to see you in the Pete Hanna Center. Samford is 1 game up with 2 games to play in the Southern Conference. They're on the road at Chattanooga. Midweek, they play Furman, which is right behind them, at home on Saturday. And if you want to see one of the best student sections in college basketball anywhere across this country, come watch the Samford students. Come see the bond they have with those players. It's a pretty special environment. Saturday promises to be very special. And then also on Saturday, Alabama did unspeakable things to Georgia. I looked up, what was it, 100-50 at one point. It settled at 108-59. And that wasn't the biggest news of the day. Earlier in the day, the NCAA Division I Men's Basketball Committee released its early bracket preview, its top 16. And who was the #1 overall seed? The Alabama Crimson Tide. That's pretty special. That's pretty special. And if that weren't enough, if you happen to turn on TNT, NBA TV, or ESPN2 on Saturday, you might have noticed an unusual thing happening. Grambling State playing Southern in Salt Lake City, Utah at the Huntsman Center in a conference game. It was the HBCU Classic as part of NBA All-Star Weekend, engineered by one of our panelists, Dr. McClelland. What an incredible opportunity for the Southwestern Athletic Conference to be showcased on national television, thanks to a partnership between the NBA and HBCUs. Great things happening. You know I sound like a basketball evangelist, a cheerleader for basketball, but I will proudly admit to both of those. And I've been that for a long time. I feel like I'm even more so now. And I'm never, as long as I've got breath in me, that's what I'm going to be. So this is a very, very special time of year. And one thing we like to do before I get out of here for now, we're going to come back in a few minutes, is we like to recognize the young men and women who made this sport great in this state. We're pleased to be joined today by one of the, well, Wade Kaiser's always with us. Oh, you do count. But say hello to Rodney Cooper. Rodney, say hello to everyone. You guys will remember Rodney contributing to Alabama basketball in a great way, being a vital contributor to the Crimson Tide, and then playing in what, about 10, 12, 20 different countries overseas. Rodney, what's the number? How many different places did you play? I played four countries overseas. Very cool. Well, Rodney, thank you so much for what you did at Alabama and for being here today. We're very glad that you're here. All right, well, I'm going to get off the stage for a moment because we wanted to take up as little time as possible because we've got a great panel for you. Let's go to the highlights. Thanks to Joey Rogers.
Right now in the Birmingham Tip-Off Club, we're in the best part of the year in high school hoops in Alabama, tournament time. The road to the blue map continues this week with regional action across the state. The state finals then kick off February 27th through March 4th here in Birmingham. Moving on to the college ranks. Here was last week's AP Top 25. Looking at number 1, the Crimson Tide of Alabama. Alone at the top, it's a pretty sight. Only 2 SEC teams in the top 25, and they would meet Wednesday. Number 1, Bama, visiting 10th ranked Tennessee in Knoxville. Let's go to the second half. Crimson Tide down 5. Likely top 5 NBA pick Brandon Miller knocks down the 3-pointer. Later in the second half, though, Volunteers up 6. Zakai Ziegler drives in for the layup. Ziegler had 15 points. Tennessee would win it 68-59. Let's head quickly to the women's side. That Alabama squad not ranked, but they have been impressive this season. They handle Vandy 88-70 to get win number 20 on the season. They have a great chance to make the big dance. Back to the men's side, the Auburn Tigers limping into Nashville Saturday, losing 5 of their last 7, taking on Vanderbilt. This one came down to the final possession. Vanderbilt's Ezra Mannion with the bucket in traffic. Commodores walk away with a 67-65 win. Auburn falls to 18-9 and 5th in the SEC. Let's head to Conference USA now. UAB on the road against UTSA, and it was jelly time in San Antonio. Jordan Walker, that is, he was cooking in the first half, knocking down a 3 here. And then when a minute left in the game, Blazers up 3. Walker would dagger from deep. UAB wins it 83-78. They're 20-8 and have won 7 of their last 8 games. Finally, we have to show you what Samford did on the road Saturday to VMI. This one an absolute blowout for Bucky McMillan and his Bulldogs. Dogs up 21 midway through the second half. Make it 23, a chore with a nice finish. Later, Britton Johnson, all alone in the corner. He ain't missing that. The 3 is good. Samford wins big, 96-61. Bulldogs now 20-9, winners of 6 straight, and atop the Southern Conference.
Thank you, Joey Rogers. Those are highlights every week. And now, of course, maybe needs no introduction. I'm just glad to know that Jim Conrad has recovered from the third-degree burns he sustained at our last meeting, courtesy of Andy Kennedy. Jim Conrad.
Thank you, Kevin. Last Monday, the NCAA Selection Committee, oh, there they are, named the top 16 teams in America. 1 week has passed. 8 of those teams lost at least 1 game last week. Y'all are laughing. But to be fair, 4 of them lost to other 16 top teams. So that means that 4 lost to non-16 top teams. So take out the 4, 12. So you got 8 right. 67%. So I'm going to compare that to our club. You know, we have a pick sheet we do, computerized, so we all pick. So I want to congratulate you on your 66.7%. And we have a new brick this week, and it's got Birmingham Tip-Off Club written on the brick. So you can have this in your office or home, wherever. But we will go to our picks, if I can get straight here. We do the brick winner first, or loser, I guess you call it. All right, third, we do the top three. Third from the bottom with 50% is Jim Turnipseed.
I brought my brick back.
Rick. So great. So you don't need to get this one. Okay. All right. Jim is a veteran of the brick award. Next to our loser is Jennifer Wilkinson, 50%. She's back there. She has been on the list also. So we've got some consistency here. But our winner with 42%, I guess you call it winner, but we call it winner of the brick, is Zach Riddle. Zach, you have your son here with you? He's got his son here with him, and he said, yay. So Zach, president of the Jefferson County, Alabama Alumni Club. Zach, congratulations. Now to our winner, and I've got a basketball for the 3 panel members that we have today, a place where you can sign it, and we'll give that out at the end. But third from the top, Frank Bromberg, 63%. Shock. Anyway, next at 63 was Mike Moore, and the winner is Greg Waycaster. Where's Greg? Is he here? He's not here? All right, you have to be present to win or lose. So Mike Moore is the winner of our basketball. Mike, I'm going to hold this, get it signed, and you can get it after the meeting. So thank you. All right. Okay, very quick. Thank everybody for participating, and we look forward to the rest of the season.
As we get settled, I just want you to know, this is a trend now, suits and sneakers, right? I just want you to know, and coaches versus cancer, you see coaches doing it on the sideline. I started that trend, I want you to know. Back in the 80s, Mike Krzyzewski was speaking at the Birmingham Southern Black Tie Club. And he did a little press conference beforehand. That was really before he became Coach K. Hadn't won a national championship yet, but everyone knew who he was. And I was wearing something quite similar to what I'm wearing now. And the first thing he did was point at me and said, the first thing I want you to know is I'm not answering any questions from anyone wearing a suit and sneakers. And I said, even if he's Polish? And he said, especially if you're Polish. Another reason I was not a big fan of doing that. All right, let's get started here. We are incredibly privileged today to be. Do I really need this? We are incredibly privileged today to be joined by 3 members of the NCAA Division I Men's Basketball Committee who issued the top 16. And Jim, I got some better numbers for you, by the way. You say, what value is it to do a top 16? At this point in the season, In the last 5 years, 65 of the 80 teams that were named to the early preview top 16 were in the top 16 seeds on Selection Sunday, which tells you that the gentlemen and ladies who serve on that committee, they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. And these gentlemen certainly do. They don't need much of an introduction, but let me just mention Martin Newton, of course, the athletics director at Samford. Pretty fair point guard back in the day for the Bulldogs. Not really. Martin, of course, his claim to fame right now is that he hired Bucky McMillan, who is doing wonderful things with Samford basketball. Again, Saturday, 1 o'clock. I'm going to take names. I want to see every one of you. If you don't have another obligation, if you're not at a wedding or a funeral, you should be in the Pete Hanna Center on Saturday.
We have a game too, Kevin.
Is it your last regular season game?
No, but it's every
game counts.
Every game counts.
I'm with you, Greg.
With all that said, I'm really, if you aren't coming to the Alabama game, go to Samford.
There you go. There you go. That'll work. That'll work.
Listen to Kevin.
Next, we have the commissioner of the Southwestern Athletic Conference, Dr. Charles McClelland. Of course, he's overseen expansion of the SWAC, the HBCU Classic. We're fortunate to have not one, but two institutions in this state who are members of the SWAC, Alabama State and Alabama A&M. And if you have not been to an Alabama A&M, Alabama State game, you talk about rivalries and atmosphere, make it a point to do that. It's a special occasion every time they meet. Dr. McClelland, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
And on the end, of course, Greg Byrne, the athletics director at the University of Alabama. His basketball team's having a pretty special season as well, both men and women, as we heard in the highlights. And I know, Greg, that you probably haven't heard this. Greg's kind of overseen a building boom at the university. And I know you haven't heard this from anyone, but I think I speak for everyone in this room when we say, build the arena.
I'm all for it.
I know you are. I know you are. That's what I like to remind people. Greg, you might have heard that Alabama football is kind of a big deal around here, but Greg is an AD for all seasons, as is Martin, as is Dr. McClelland in the commissioner's chair. So let's get to it. Let's talk about what they do behind the scenes that shapes so much of what is going to happen over the next 6 weeks or so. So let's start with Dr. McClelland. Now, if I understand correctly, were all of you gentlemen in Indianapolis last week?
Yes, we were.
And you were discussing and putting together the top 16. Dr. McClelland, tell us about that process and how do you settle on those top 16?
Well, it's an ongoing process that really starts in the month of November when basketball starts. There are 12 committee members. The chair does not have conferences, but the other 11 members will have 3 primary and 3 secondary conferences. There are 32 Division I basketball conferences. One of us might have 4. And we have the responsibility of having conference calls with those conferences, both primary and secondary. Our responsibility is not to get into the committee room and advocate for those conferences, but to be the expert. Did they have injuries? What about the win streak? What happened during the win streak? What happened during the losing streak? And we get together and we put that information into a spreadsheet. So I have a particular conference and I say, if the tournament started today, these 2 are in, these 4 are under consideration, these 3 are out. So we got together last week and that was really the first order of business. We all went around and we gave our evaluations of our conferences. Now, the NCAA is infamous for telling you everything to do. We have a schedule. They tell us when to eat, when to get up, when to go to the bathroom, when to come back from the bathroom, and when to get started. So everything is kind of scheduled out. I say that to say there are several committees and there are several subcommittees and there are subcommittees to the subcommittee. There is a committee, and I think, Martin, you're on that subcommittee. I don't know if you are, Greg, but it's the first quadrant subcommittee. So both of these individuals were on that subcommittee to give us an insight on the first quadrant, which is going to be 1 through 24, right? So they get together, they take all of this information prior to the entire committee getting together, And then their responsibility is to be a resource to the full committee. So when we get into the room now, and I think this is on Wednesday of last week, we get together and we start going through the voting process. And part of the voting process is to give, it's actually a voting process. It's ultimately what's going to occur when we get together in March. So when we vote for the top 16, we put in who we think. And I won't get into the terminology of it, but there are certain principles. So if you get 9 of 12 votes, then you're in the tournament. And as we go for the 16 unveil, if you get 9 of the 12, you're on the board to be in the top 16. And then we'll kind of go through, we'll analyze the teams, we'll debate the teams, we'll talk about wins, losses, injuries, what happened during this win streak, what happened during that losing streak, debate it. And ultimately, we come out as a cohesive group. And I'll stop with this last statement. A lot of people think that it's 12 out of 12, and that's not necessarily how it goes. I might have one matrix, Greg might have another, Martin might have another, but it is the 9 of the 12 that ultimately gets you into the tournament or gets you into that top 16. And we'll vote, and then we'll scrub, and scrub will put teams next to each other. And you know, there's always, well, Creighton and Xavier in the same conference, and Marquette, and all 3 of those were being considered. Did you have Marquette over Xavier? Well, Xavier was over Marquette until Marquette beat Xavier on Wednesday night. That was one of those games that we were watching. We knew, and we were able to evaluate that. So long answer, but it is a rather lengthy process, but it's a thorough process, again, where the NCAA checks off almost every box that you can imagine to ensure that we're doing our jobs correctly.
So it mirrors what you will do in the week leading up to Selection Sunday. And along those lines, we've heard this for years, that when your team, if you work for a particular school, for example, or a particular conference, that when one of your teams is under discussion, you leave the room. Greg, does that mean you had to leave the room?
Yeah, I had to leave the room a few times, but fortunately, with the seating Alabama had, I wasn't out of the room very long. And so Wednesday night, I had asked permission to go to Knoxville for the game, which obviously I did a very poor job of ADing at that game. But, and so while I was gone Wednesday night, I think I left the room about 4 o'clock to go down to Knoxville. And while I was gone, the committee talked about, okay, if Alabama wins, they're going to stay as number 1, because at that point, Alabama was placed as number 1. And then if Alabama loses, what happens? And so I wasn't told that conversation was going to take place. And so the committee decided that if Alabama, as long as Alabama didn't get beat by 25 or 30 or something like that, that Alabama was going to stay number 1. So the next morning, on Thursday morning, when I'm back in Indianapolis, we start talking about the seedings. And so Alabama's on the first 4, and they asked me to leave the room. Well, I took my iPad out with me, took my phone, thought I'd be out there for 15, 20 minutes, half hour. And there's a doorbell that rings when you're sitting out there. And so the doorbell rings after about 30 seconds. So I come back in with my coffee and my iPad and thinking that I didn't have much of a chance to get any other work done during that time. And Dan Gavitt, who's the chair of is the vice president for basketball for the NCAA men's basketball, he gives you a recap of what they just talked about. You are literally not allowed to comment. You can't ask any questions. And they give the summary to the athletic director or the commissioner, and then you just sit back down. And so literally I've had a lot of conversations over the years with people who've been on the committee saying, you know, your team, you can't talk about it. And a lot of people have kind of rolled their eyes saying, oh, come on, you're going to have a hallway conversation or something. They're serious as a heart attack. You do not talk about it. It's all part of the integrity of the committee, and they're very serious about it. So everybody follows that and adheres to it.
And think about it. We made him wait all night when he lost. He didn't know if he was going to be number 1 or fall.
Didn't have a clue.
We talked about him more than we talked about the team during that 30 seconds he was out of there. Right?
Get in line.
There are so many misconceptions about what happens behind those closed doors. And you would think some of the people who have those misconceptions are people like UCLA coach Mick Cronin. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but Mick was upset. UCLA was the number 8 overall seed, which makes them the last 2 seed, if you will. And he was complaining that Arizona was ranked ahead, and that would mean, if that holds, of course, which it might not necessarily happen. But Martin, that means they would be in the West, they would be out of their region. And why did that? And he suggested publicly that this was because UCLA is leaving the Pac-12 to go to the Big Ten. Was that discussed in that room at all?
Absolutely not. And look, I'm the rookie. I'm the old guy on the panel, but I'm the rookie in the room. So when you get into questions like that, I'm gonna look at Charles and go, Charles, what do you think about that? But I'll tell you this. I'll tell you a quick funny story. So when my dad was on the committee years ago, and I was with Nike, I used to ask him all the time, well, how come this team didn't get him? How did you guys leave this team out? What are you thinking? And he goes, let me ask you something. Did you start watching games in November? I said, yeah, some, not a lot. He says, do you know all the data? Did you look at all the other teams? Did you look at body of works, all the other teams? I said, well, not really. Were you in the room? I said, no, sir. He said, then shut up. And so the biggest surprise for me has been the amount of transparency in that room and the amount of honesty and the integrity. You use the word integrity, and this is a process that I witnessed this first go around. Now you got to understand, my head was spinning, but it's a very thorough process. The NCAA has left no stone unturned to try to make sure that we seed and select the right teams.
You mentioned data and metrics and all the numbers that you are supplied with. And Dr. McClelland, I'd like you to address this. Give us an idea. And by the way, Greg, I think we need to inform. I think there are some people on the AP poll that don't realize that Alabama and Houston actually played earlier this season.
We did.
And if I recall correctly, it was in Houston and Alabama won the game. But if you've seen the latest poll today, they put Houston back at 1, Alabama's number 2. So again, what do you expect from a bunch of sports writers, right? But when it comes to metrics, what really matters? Ken Palm, the net rankings. I'm sure you don't look at polls, but from a bunch of sports writers. But Dr. McClelland, give us a little insight into that as far as the metrics that are available to you.
Well, I think they all matter. And we separate them into those matrix that are predictive, and we sort them those that are results-based. And we give those 6 a number, right? 3 on this side, 3 on that side. Also, the NCAA evaluation tool, a lot of people don't know that's what NET stands for, the NCAA evaluation tool, is exactly that. It is a tool. So a lot of people will home in on the net, but the net only tells part of the story. We look at strength of schedule. We look at non-conference strength of schedule. We look at quad 1 wins. We look at quad 2 wins. And you say, what are all of these matrices? And we have literally 4 computer screens with information on it. And then we'll say, pull up this team, pull up that team. Let's compare this team. It tells you common opponents. It tells you if they played each other. It tells you home, away, what quadrant they're in. Quad 1 is at home 1 through 50, 1 through 75 on the road. Quad 2, 3, 4. I mean, it literally has just about every statistical evaluation that you could ever wish for. They created a new spreadsheet that had all of the injuries. So you could pull up this game and it'll tell you what student athlete missed that game. So we say this all the time. And I saw also, I can't remember who it was that said, well, the NCAA chair gave the standard spiel when we talked about this was razor thin and that was razor thin when we did the top 16 unveil. But that's actually true. What's important to me might not necessarily be as important to the other 11 committee members, but they all are evaluated equally. And I keep reiterating, there might be a team that I think is better than the team that's ranked ahead. That is the reason why we have 12 committee members voting. So you have all of these different matrix. The information is before you, but it is a totality of all of that that allows you to make your decision.
And of course, we as fans, we get bombarded with information from television, from social media. One thing that television loves to do is the blind resume comparison. And they'll put team A, team B, team C. and they'll have all these different statistical categories. Do you do blind resumes, or when you're comparing teams, Greg, you know the team, right?
Yeah, we know the team. And I think, what Charles has talked about there with what's important to one may not be, they may weigh it a little bit differently. Like you look at you can't really control your conference, right? That's what it is. But what you can control at times is your non-conference strength of schedule. And so I won't name the school, but last year, one school in particular was really upset about not getting in the tournament. And that happens every year, so it's not unique. But their non-conference schedule was in ranked 260 or 270. And
well, you can say Texas A&M. I won't tell Buzz Williams.
That's right. You're a smart guy. And they'll say, well, all the other metrics were good. It's like, yeah, they are good. And we're always on the record in today's world, right? But
we're off the record today.
Off the record.
You know, I'm not a daily journalist anymore. So
I know.
I'm an occasional journalist.
That's right. So, and Nate and I talk about it. We really scheduled up. And last year for the tournament for Alabama, and I left the room every time. Part of the reason why Alabama had as high a seed as it did was this non-conference strength of schedule. And so we go to our AD meetings. And as the NCAA basketball committee member, I will say that. And I'm not the first to say it. It goes back to Tom Jernstead. He would come, Mike Slive used to have him come in and talk. And we would talk about things that were important, and non-conference strength of schedule was constantly talked about. And so you have some ability as an institution to control that, not completely, because it takes two to tango, it takes two to play. But you can, I think for the good of the game, having good content is important. And you've seen that with what we're doing with football non-conference scheduling, right? And I think the same goes for basketball, men's or women's basketball non-conference scheduling. Put games out there that fans are going to want to see, kids are going to be excited to play in. That's good for the game. And so we've done that. And speaking of that, I'm going to embarrass Martin for just a second. When we were in the committee room, I think on Thursday morning, Tom Jernstead, whose name I mentioned, most people don't know who he is, but he created the Final Four from where it was in about 1960 something, late 60s, worked for the NCAA for 38 years. The Final Four is what it is today because of Tom. Tom passed away of a major heart attack during COVID. And he was one of my mentors, a lot of people's mentors. And they just created the Tom Jernstead Lifetime Achievement Award. There's three people who are winning it the first time. Jim Delaney, the former commissioner of the Big Ten, Dave Gavitt, who I mentioned his son, Dan Gavitt, who was commissioner of the Big East, president of the Celtics, and a guy named C.M. Newton as the third. So we were all in the room with Martin and when Danny Gavitt the other day when that was unveiled. And he deserves a round of applause for that recognition.
I don't know if I do, but he definitely does.
That's for sure. Both of you do.
How much, Martin, again, you're the rookie on the committee this year. How much, as you said, your dad was on the committee in years past. How much did he talk to you about when he was with us about just what went on behind those closed doors? Did he share interesting anecdotes? And from his inside information he shared with you, did that make you more or less interested in being on the committee yourself?
I'm old. I'm trying to remember what order you went in, but I will say this, it's evolved so much. I walked into the committee room the other day, and as Charles said, there's 4 computer screens in front of you and a laptop. Now, for those of you that are over 60 in the room, raise your hand. That's a challenge, right? 1 computer screen is a challenge, and now we got 4 with a laptop. And so I was a little overwhelmed, and these guys are sick of me asking them questions because I call them all the time. And so it's evolved, and the metrics have evolved, the analytics have evolved. But what hasn't changed is the amount of games that you have to watch and the making sure that you look not just at a game or two. And I use Greg's team as an example. Yeah, they got beat by Tennessee, but it was their body of work. It wasn't just one game. And I remember him saying that a lot, is don't get caught up on, as fans, we have a tendency to do that, right? We get caught up on a game or two. And he says it's important that you look at the body of work. Look at them from the beginning of the season all the way to the end of the season, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do and what we're charged to do is to select and seed the best 68 teams. And so you can't get caught up on, well, this team just lost to Tennessee and now they need to fall off that one line. You look at the body of work, and that's what you have to do. And that was his recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's what AP poll voters do. They move teams based on their most recent performance, which of course is foolish. But along those lines, Dr. McClelland, you know, I can remember back in the day, they would talk about the importance of your last 12 games or your last 10 games. Where does that stand now? Because some people say, well, yeah, they did well in November. Alabama played and beat a number of quality teams in November, but this is February, this is March. How is the emphasis placed now on not recency bias, but recency performance?
It is truly the body of work. A win in November is just as good as a win in March. And it kind of goes back to the point that Greg was making about the non-conference strength of schedule. There are some conferences that have those top tier teams, that quad one schedule built in, the Big 12, right? Every game that they play, regardless of what team, it's a quad one opportunity. But then you have a conference such as the American Conference with the University of Houston. And you saw last year, and in my opinion, I think Houston was kind of misplaced. They were a little bit better than where we put them, which actually—
Andy Kennedy agrees with you,
right?
By the way.
Right. So it caused problems for those teams that they played. It wasn't necessarily that big of an issue for Houston. And what you've seen Houston do is go out and schedule those games at the beginning of the season. They went out and played the Alabama to be able to get those quad one opportunities. And when we look at that, we evaluate those games just the same. But we also do look at where are you coming into the tournament. And a lot of that has to point to, were they injured? Are they healthy? So, you know, you can't, and there's an example of that this year. I won't say the name of the conference or the team where, you know, they were complaining about where they were in the rankings, but they had a high non-conference strength of schedule, and they started off not well. So all of their matrix are not there. They're winning games here at the end, but it's almost like, you know, when my father told me, Charles, you can't start off making F's at the beginning of the year and then think that you're going to make an A just because you made 2 A's at the end of the year. You know, you have to make A's at the beginning of the year in order to finish with an A. And I would say resumes are pretty much the same way. You have to be consistent throughout. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to lose a game. You're not going to go on a losing streak. But each of those games are as important as the next game.
You guys all represent schools and from very different conferences. Obviously, the Southern Conference, the Southwestern Athletic Conference, the Southeastern Conference. How do you, as committee members, Greg, look at teams as members of a conference? And do you say, well, people are talking about the Big 12 getting 8 or 9 teams in, or the Big 10 getting 11 teams in, or that why, you know, should the SEC have more? It doesn't really work that way, though, in that room, does it?
It doesn't. You're looking at individual programs and what they're doing. And I mean, you'll talk about a conference more just, well, they've got a Big 12 game tonight, or, you know, a conference game in that manner. But it's not a driver whatsoever. There's not a goal saying, well, boy, Big 12 this year, we really feel we need to get 9 of the 10 teams in. That discussion never happens. You go to each team when you're scrubbing teams, if you're scrubbing Kansas against Houston, let's say, the conference discussion has no merit other than saying, here's the conference record right now. That may come into it. And looking at you may look at common opponents. You may look at what they've done against other teams that are in the same range from a quad one standpoint. And if they happen to be a conference related, that's just a coincidence. It's not a driver.
How much, and Martin, again, as the rookie, you've been through the top 16 process now, which is kind of a dry run for Selection Sunday week. And you're all basketball guys in different ways with your backgrounds. You've worked with John Calipari at Kentucky. You've worked with Nike. You've been a college basketball player. Do you look at styles of play as you're, in your own evaluation, as you're comparing teams? Do you look at styles of play?
Yeah, you do. I think you look at the offensive efficiencies and the defensive efficiencies. I mean, you have to look at all those things. But then, again, to Charles's point, that's just one tool that you would use. So I wouldn't look and say, boy, that team's really good defensive team. they're going to do well in the tournament. It's just, again, it's the whole body of work. But I'll say, for me, walking into that room, I remember my freshman year playing. You know, the game was so fast. I mean, I was throwing balls all over the court, as Tim Francis, who was a teammate of mine, can attest to. My sophomore year, it slowed down a little bit. By the time I was a junior, I started to actually understand what I was doing. So for me right now, my head's spinning. I'm that freshman who's just throwing the ball all over the court. But I talked to Greg a lot about, and actually went down and visited with Greg. Okay, how do you guys go through some things? They've got some analytics and some data that's unbelievable. I talked to Charles, and he said, you know, you've got to trust your own eyes, your own gut. I've talked to others in the committee, and everybody's got a different way of doing it, which is what makes this committee so special, I think, because to Charles's point, you've got to get 9 out of 12 votes. And if everybody's doing it the same way, then we really don't need 12 people in that room. So for me, offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency, that's important, but that's just one of the tools.
Charles, there's been a lot of discussion about expanding the tournament. Some people say go to 80, some people say 96. You hear all different numbers thrown out there. Who ultimately will make that decision, and how much is the opinion of the committee and committee members, will that be considered in that decision?
Well, ultimately, we don't know who will make that decision. We're going through the transformation and the transformation committee. And as a basketball committee group, we've sent word out that we think that that decision should rest with the basketball committee, because we are the ones that have been isolated, associated with basketball, and have that intricate knowledge. You also have the men's basketball oversight committee. So in the NCAA legislative process, it'll go from our committee to the oversight committee to the voting bodies within the NCAA. But through this new transformation committee piece, you know, the expansion of tournaments are now on the table. It wasn't necessarily targeted towards basketball. I think the original conversation really started with baseball, but it has allowed now for the conversation to start. And you really have to look at what's gonna be best for the tournament. So keep in mind, you have the NIT, which is another 32 teams. So the opportunities that are out there are greater than just the 68 that are in, you know, so do you start to dilute the NCAA tournament by adding more? Do you do away with the NIT? So those are all conversations that are going to have to be had. And that's going to be at a much higher level. But I believe that if there is a recommendation that comes from anywhere about how many teams need to be in the NCAA tournament, it will start and stop with the basketball committee.
Any sense off the record of what the committee, or maybe just you personally, would recommend along those lines as far as whether to expand the tournament or keep it at 68, Greg?
68 has worked pretty well, and it's gonna, if let's say we go to 90, or let's say we add another 12 teams and go to 80, for instance. That's, I'm doing the math wrong because 12 wouldn't work, but let's say we add 16 more teams and get to 86 or 84. There's more teams playing, there's more costs involved. One thing y'all don't know, when it comes to, there's a full-time NCAA staff member and a couple support people just to handle the travel for the NCAA men's and women's basketball tournaments. Trying to get that many bodies moved on that short of notice all over the country is a lot of work. So you add more teams to it, the logistics of it will be challenging. The money from a contractual standpoint to try to make all this thing work is for, you know, the first and second round games are helpful. There's no doubt about it, but it's really once you start getting to that Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final 4, those are when you look at the numbers for individual games, that's where the high ratings come in, which help create value to make you want to, you know, continue to expand that opportunity. And like Charles has talked about, there is the NIT. I'm sure there are NIT teams that would have won NCAA basketball tournament games, but that's not a lot over the years. And so I do think when you got something that's working pretty well, you need to be very thoughtful before you go out and say, hey, let's just change it to change.
Is that, and actually I apologize, I should know the answer to this, Martin. I know at one point, if you won your regular season championship, but you did not win your conference tournament and the automatic bid that goes with it, you got an automatic bid to the NIT. Does that still hold?
Yes, it does. In fact,
Not that I asked that for any particular
No,
reason.
no, that's okay. You must have listened in on my phone call with Bucky this morning because that's exactly what he asked me as well. So yes, that is true. If you win the regular season, but don't win, leagues like the Southern Conference normally are one bid leagues. So if you don't win your conference tournament, but you've won your conference championship, you get rewarded to go to an NIT. And the NIT, look, again, I'm showing my age, but back in the day, the NIT was the prestigious tournament. It wasn't the NCAA tournament. It was the NIT. And then over time, as television has gotten involved, obviously the NCAA has taken on a life of its own. But and I think the other thing to mention is you've got a TV contract right now that goes to 2032. So there's a lot more factors in it than just changing for the sake, as Greg said, for the sake of change.
Charles, I'm interested to know, and I believe this is correct. Next season, you will be the chairman of the committee.
That's correct.
So we'll see you on Selection Sunday, and
Hopefully so.
and on early bracket Saturday. How, in other ways, how will your role change when you become the chairman?
It becomes more of an administrative role. I won't have the conference monitoring responsibility. The travel is ridiculous. So even as vice chair, my role has changed. So I had to keep all of the roles of a current committee member. And then I have to go into all of the chair meetings. So the chair meets with the NCAA staff every other week. So I have to go on that. I had to join the men's basketball oversight committee because all of our policies have to be approved by the oversight. And then I had to do some Phoenix travel because Phoenix is the Final Four for next year. And that ultimately is what the chair is doing this year, is more of that administrative side to go to the cities. They do a lot of events, but the chair's responsibility really is to get everybody in that room on Selection Sunday and monitor that process to ensure that we get to a as perfect bracket as we possibly can. So a lot of the duties that we talked about today goes away, and more administrative duties will come into play. But it's definitely a big deal. It's an honor. You try not to let your peers down. And the NCAA basketball tournament, I've said this in my opinion, is the greatest sporting event in the world. It's a 3 to 4 week event to where if you have to take time off, you take it, you take that weekend off, right? And it's a really big deal. A lot of people may or may not know this, but from an NCAA's perspective, the NCAA doesn't get revenue off of football. 96, 97% of the NCAA revenue comes from this men's basketball tournament. So if this tournament isn't successful, theoretically, there is no NCAA. That is the reason why we had to go to Indianapolis, Indiana during COVID and spend 29 days in the bubble in isolation. That is the reason why we had to move forward, because the entire future of the NCAA hinges on this basketball tournament. So it is a tremendous honor, but also a tremendous responsibility.
And we want to save a few minutes for you guys to be able to ask some questions. But one more thing I wanted to ask you, Greg, when it comes to site selection, where does Tennessee go? Where does Alabama State go? Where does Samford go? Where does UAB go? Where does Alabama go? Who is protected? What seeds are protected in which you try to keep them close to home? Give us a little insight into how that process works.
Yeah, so there's another program that's pretty cool that is in the room that we did towards the end of the meetings on Thursday. And so the number one overall seed gets to choose where they want to go to. And so that's asked in advance that the teams that are on the radar screen for that. And so for this year, it's basically based off of the regional rounds. Okay, so you have Las Vegas, you have Kansas City, Louisville, and New York. Yeah, Louisville. And so we were talking. Charles got Mississippi roots, so he was talking about Louisville, and so we were talking about that the other day. And so hypothetically speaking, if Alabama was fortunate enough to get to be the number one seed, it would be. We would choose the Louisville region, And so that'd be the best thing for our fans. That'd be the best thing for our families as far as being able to get there. And so then the first and second round, you get selected as the number one seed would go to the closest place to them. And so obviously this year that's Birmingham. And so then number two they would put them at the closest site to wherever that is. Number three would go to the closest site. Number four would go to the closest site. But that's when you can see what happened with where Mick Cronin talks about UCLA getting in another region. You know, that's part of the process. But there is nobody sitting in there saying, man, we really need to seat this thing to make sure Kansas City or Kansas is going to Kansas City or Kansas State's going to Kansas City. That doesn't happen.
You know, in fact, the computer program, after Alabama chose that they were going to their site, that's why being a number one seed is just not the best thing. To be the overall number one seed, you get to choose. If you're the 4 overall seed, you don't get to choose. You go whatever is available. And then once we do the 1 and 2, we plug in cities. So you go 1 through 68, you'll have a couple of teams up here, but the vast majority of them, before we even seed them, the cities are already dictated because the numbers they have to have a correspondent to be able to have 1 versus 8 at a certain range. They're all computer programs. So then we go and it's based upon mileage. So the theory or the conspiracy that we wanted a West Coast team in the East Coast or the East Coast and the West Coast is just totally a theory and a conspiracy theory because it's primarily a computer program and it's all based upon the closeness and the proximity, and it's a domino effect from that number one seed.
Well, let's give those of you in the audience a chance, if you would. If anyone has any questions for our panelists. Yes, sir. How many times is the present format the question was, how many times in the present format has the number one overall seed won the national championship? I don't have the answer to that. Any of you guys?
Yeah, I don't have the answer either, but we did get some statistics that the probability of all 4 number one seeds making it to the Final Four is way less than 50%. I don't know the numbers, but the number one overall seed, I'll have to do the research, but I think they have lost more than they have won by that comparison.
Who else has a question? Yes, sir, in the back.
So you said in terms of choosing where you go, say Alabama happens to be, in the first 4 but not number 1. So they would still go to Birmingham, right? They may be in the West region or the Midwest or something like that.
That's right. First and second round would be in Birmingham this year. If all of a sudden, let's say Auburn was number 1 and we were number 2, we'd still both would go to Birmingham this year. Yeah. I don't want to be held to it, but if I was trying to get tickets right now, I wouldn't wait too long.
There's only 234 available. So
yeah, we literally, what do we get? We get 300 or 400? We get 300 or 400 tickets total. That's for our kids, their families, coaches. I think literally for Birmingham, I think I've got two tickets as the AD. So you can see how many there are to go around. So if you have access, get them.
So if you read between the lines, don't call Greg Byrne if you need tickets to the.
Yes, don't do that.
Yes, call Charles.
No, they don't. And that's actually a good point in part of our bracketing procedures. When you add up a bracket, there's a number that comes at the end. And that number, all 4 regions have to be within the number 5. And that's based upon competitiveness. So they're trying to make sure that each region is as competitive as the other region or perceive this region is easier. So no, once you bracket, it's basically an S curve. We actually go and we bracket. So no team would know who they would be playing, and the committee could not do it as well. It's all part of the bracketing principles.
And the cool thing is too, is the software that they've got. So there's some other policies. For example, you don't want teams in the same conference playing in the second round. So that may red box that particular place. So then you've got to go back and look at the geography and look at different things. So there's a lot more goes into it. The teams really have very little say. It's the computer software, quite frankly, that does.
Is it the earliest, is the Sweet 16 the earliest now that teams from the same conference can meet, or is it the Elite Eight? Because so many teams, obviously, you know, some conferences put a lot of teams.
And Charles, correct me where I'm wrong here, but you like with the Big 12 this year having the year that they're having, I think if the goal is if you play twice during the regular season, you can't play till the Sweet 16. Is that right? But if you've only played one time, theoretically, you could play in the second round. Yeah, I was paying attention to that part.
That's good to know. That's a new information. Dick.
No blowback thus far. I think they know. Perhaps if Alabama ends on the #1 seed line, we might get some, but none yet. And again, keep in mind, there are 12 committee members. All conferences are represented either by an athletic director or a commissioner. So, and I think it was set up that way so those type things wouldn't, necessarily occur. I don't really think when they look at me, they think Alabama, right? So what we've been able to accomplish as a overall committee, I think, is it has been consistent, and that is every representation that you could possibly think of within the NCAA has had input on that committee, and I think that has really given us a lot of good cover.
Anyone else? Yes, sir. Down in front.
I understand it creates travel issues, but would there be any consideration in going back to the model for standalone Sweet 16 games on Saturday and Sunday? So you basically have basketball Saturday and Sunday, you can watch all of those same time.
Yeah, there has, in my time on the committee, I'm on my second year, there has not been that discussion. I think that the TV networks have strong opinions about where things get placed. I can tell you that from the campus level too. And to my knowledge, there's not been, in my time, there's not been any discussion.
Chris.
This one comes up a lot, the S curve, if the #1 seed, let's say, is in Kansas City, hypothetically. Kansas is the 8th 2 seed. That's 2 seed almost gets a home game. You got to hypothetically the 8th. You'll adjust that, tweak it, or is it just?
No, we don't tweak it. That conversation did come up even last week about a certain team getting a true home game. And there was a conversation about the higher seed saying, hey, it might be a disadvantage to that particular team. And I think the response was that's just how it fell out. So, and there's been precedent over the course of the tournament that has allowed that to happen. So we've talked about it, but I think it's just, if it falls that way, you got to be ready.
And a lot of Alabama fans may think otherwise, but Birmingham is not Alabama's home court. And after the last 2 years here,
definitely hasn't been.
It has not.
Great crowds.
Not to bring up those memories, but
yeah, heck, that's just part of why you play the game, right? Timmy was really hot for Gonzaga when we played him, and we had a hard time matching up with them, and they beat us. But at the same time too, my wife Regina was asking me. She said, "Well, if you have a chance to play in Birmingham, or you want to do that?" And I said, "Well, ultimately, yes. I mean, how do you say that to our families, our fans, and everybody else? And that's by far the best thing. And so it's up to our team to come in and play well. But I know with the support that we would have here, I feel confident we'd have that opportunity to do that."
Well, I think we have time for one more. Yes, sir.
Before we went to question and answer, we were talking about #1 seed having a choice. I guess where I'm going with this, in the past, it seemed like California would be like
you got an Eastern, somebody elects an Eastern time of playing an early game out west. And he's always complained about playing 4 games in SEC. Is there a point where you get to be at your number 8, 9, or 10 seed, just be thankful you're in there, or does the computer also look at East Coast versus West Coast, 1 game, 5 games, or they call it they may?
That's a great question. So once we bracket, right, and you have all of the games set up in it's East Coast, West Coast, then that bracket gets turned over to TNT CBS, and we turn it over on Sunday afternoon. So
you don't know those times yet.
We don't know those times. So CBS will take that bracket, and they literally have about an hour, maybe 2 hours to be able to plug that bracket in for the selection show, and then put times on the games. And ironically, the times, as you can imagine, is not necessarily based upon competitiveness, is based upon ratings. So they have to go from True TV to TNT to TBS to CBS. And they're bracketing their brackets and slotting those games based upon the time. So we don't even see the times. We'll get those whenever CBS announces those after that. That's later on Sunday night.
And I can say this because I work for Calipari, he'd complain regardless.
I think we can end on that note. First of all, thank you, Martin Newton, Charles McClelland, Greg Byrne. This has been a fascinating panel to hear your insight coming off of, again, the early bracket preview, and to know the work you have ahead of you the week of Selection Sunday. And Charles, we're going to claim you from Alabama. And I have to tell you, I think I speak for everyone in this room, we are incredibly proud that this state, which is known to people on the outside for another sport, is a true, what I like to say on Twitter, hashtag hoop state. And it is because of individuals like you. Thank you so much for what you do. Thank you so much for being here. Good luck in a couple of weeks.
Thank y'all for doing this.